What happens when a predator steps out of the shadows, unburdened by a past, because his identity belongs to someone else? In the thriving underworld of 1990s Melbourne, one figure became an enigma, baffling seasoned detectives and striking profound terror into hardened syndicate members. Born in 1959 under the suffocating grip of an oppressive Eastern European regime, Nikolai Radev was forged in a crucible where survival demanded absolute self-reliance. Growing up, surrounded by constant surveillance, he learned early that power was the only reliable currency. His path was shaped by the harsh environment of state control and the unforgiving reality of local detention centers. But to build a true empire, he needed a fresh canvas, a place where the rigid scrutiny of his homeland could be traded for unsuspecting vulnerability. In 1981, Nikolai arrived on Australian shores as a political refugee seeking sanctuary. He stepped into a society that felt infinitely more trusting than the one he left behind. Yet, his slate wasn't genuinely clean. His extensive history of severe misconduct had been conveniently omitted from official documentation. Likely erased through the quiet influence of overseas syndicate connections. A temporary visa, however, offered limited protection for a man harboring illicit ambitions. He needed permanence. He needed to become a ghost. The solution he devised was a masterclass in psychological calculation. He turned his attention to his neighbor, an honest, hard-working factory employee named Ivan Solikov. Solikov was an immigrant building a peaceful life, possessing the precise physical characteristics that made him the perfect vessel for a devastating scheme. One day, without warning, the quiet neighbor simply vanished. He never clocked into his shift, never touched his hard-earned savings, and was never seen again. While the ultimate fate of the unfortunate man remained an unfathomable mystery to authorities, the harrowing reality was that his life had been entirely absorbed. Nikolai meticulously memorized every detail of the victim's existence, his parental lineage, his employment history, and his birthplace. From that chilling moment forward, Nikolai ceased to exist on paper. Whenever he faced local enforcement, it was the stolen name of Ivan Solikov that absorbed the legal blow. This profound deception allowed him to construct a sprawling network of illicit operations, while his true identity remained untouched, setting the stage for an unprecedented era of intimidation. With a ghost's invulnerability secured through his stolen identity, Nikolai began constructing an empire built not merely on physical dominance, but on absolute, paralyzing psychological control. He understood that traditional street crime carried unnecessary risks, so he turned his predatory focus toward those already operating outside the boundaries of the law. His primary targets were the illicit operators of the city, those dealing in contraband and unsanctioned enterprises. The logic behind this strategy was as cold as it was brilliant. By extorting individuals who were themselves actively evading law enforcement, he guaranteed their absolute silence. These victims could hardly walk into a local precinct to report the loss of their illicit funds, making his reign of intimidation nearly impossible for detectives to formally track or prosecute. This calculated approach was backed by a sheer, terrifying physicality. Honed through years of rigorous Greco-Roman wrestling during his youth, he possessed an imposing stature that demanded immediate compliance. Yet, physical strength was merely the baseline of his complex methodology. What truly separated him from the traditional enforcers of the era was his complete disregard for the unwritten rules of the underworld. In a landscape where the families of adversaries were generally considered strictly off-limits, Nikolai weaponized the innocent. His operating philosophy was one of total, scorched earth domination, designed to break not just his immediate target, but everyone they held dear. In one particularly harrowing instance late in the decade, his calculated cruelty was put on full display. Breaching the private residence of an underworld associate, Nikolai and his accomplices restrained the man's elderly parents, his spouse, and his young 5-year-old child. To ensure immediate and total submission, he leveled a severe, fatal threat against the youngest family member until his financial demands were met. The profound terror inflicted during this home invasion wasn't just about extracting currency. It was a loud, chilling broadcast to the entire criminal network that absolutely no one was safe. His appetite for dominance extended into unimaginable realms of interpersonal humiliation. Confronting another debtor in his own home, Nikolai subjected the man to a deeply traumatic physical violation, right before the eyes of his terrified loved ones. Forensic psychologists would later describe this behavior as the definitive hallmark of a predatory Mindan individual, whose primary goal was to completely obliterate a victim's sense of self-worth. To amplify this psychological terror, he actively cultivated the moniker of a ruthless Russian enforcer, leveraging the fearsome, borderless reputation of Eastern European syndicates to ensure his enemies remained permanently paralyzed by fear. While the phantom identity of a missing factory worker provided a temporary shield, his refugee visa was a fragile thread holding his illicit empire together. The ever-present threat of deportation loomed over his ambitions. To truly cement his anchor in this new society, Nikolai required a permanent, unimpeachable tether to the nation. This grim necessity led him to target a profoundly different kind of victim. In 1985, his predatory gaze fell upon Sylvia, a 16-year-old civilian working in a local salon. Armed with an Australian passport and an entirely clean background, she was the perfect, unwitting pawn for his grand design. He did not approach her with the brutal intimidation he reserved for the Underworld. Instead, he deployed a meticulously crafted offensive of overwhelming charm. He inundated the young woman with lavish attention and persistent flattery, systematically dismantling her natural defenses. To the unsuspecting teenager, it felt like a whirlwind romance. To Nikolai, the engagement was a cold, calculated transaction. Merely 3 months after their initial encounter, the traps snapped shut with a formal wedding. The marriage granted him the ultimate prize, a legitimate pathway to permanent residency, and the eventual promise of citizenship, effectively neutralizing the risk of being exiled by immigration authorities. On the surface, he performed the role of the devoted patriarch flawlessly. He projected the image of a respectable suburban family man, successfully chasing the middle-class dream alongside his young bride. It was a brilliantly constructed illusion of normalcy that signaled stability to the outside world, making him practically invisible to neighborhood suspicions. However, the moment the front door closed, the carefully curated facade crumbled. The sanctuary of their home rapidly devolved into a private, inescapable prison. Sylvia was no longer a cherished partner, but an asset to be managed through severe, unrelenting control. He subjected her to years of intense psychological and emotional manipulation, ensuring she lived in a perpetual state of quiet terror. Any thought of escape was instantly crushed under the weight of his chilling promises to harm not only her, but anyone who dared to intervene on her behalf. She, along with their eventual daughter, were ultimately utilized as essential props in his grand theatrical cover story. The stolen identity of a vanished neighbor and the captive existence of a terrified young bride formed the twin pillars of his survival. Together, these deceptions allowed the predator to walk freely in the daylight, orchestrating his reign of terror through the city's dark underbelly. By the late 1990s, the elusive phantom finally caught the concentrated glare of law enforcement. The catalyst was a profound tragedy in 1998, when 2 officers lost their lives in the line of duty near his suburban neighborhood. Given his well-documented disdain for authority, Nikolai immediately became a primary person of interest. Detective Ben Archbold, a seasoned investigator with the Organized Crime Division, was officially tasked with unraveling the intricate web of this untouchable figure. For years, the squad hit frustrating dead ends, unable to unearth direct evidence tying him to the fatal act. It wasn't until the dawn of 2001 that a critical fracture appeared in Nikolai's impenetrable armor, stemming from a seemingly minor encounter behind bars. While temporarily detained for a separate charge, the predator crossed paths with Sadat Khan, a convicted white-collar fraudster. Sensing an exceptionally easy mark, Nikolai offered the vulnerable man protection for a steep financial price. When Khan was released that April, he foolishly believed his ordeal was settled. Instead, the nightmare had just begun. Nikolai systematically tracked him down, subjecting the businessman to an intense, 8-hour ordeal of severe physical assault and relentless psychological torment within a secluded hotel room. Holding him captive, Nikolai demanded a staggering $250,000. Desperate to survive the unfathomable situation, Khan agreed to a substantial initial payment. However, When the extortionist arrived at a residential address to collect, the terrified victim made a desperate, decisive move. Armed and fearing for his very existence, Khan fired a weapon at his tormentor, missing narrowly, but forcing the fearsome enforcer to flee into the shadows. This brazen act of defiance shattered Nikolai's aura of invincibility and triggered a massive, coordinated manhunt. Now a wanted fugitive, his erratic movements were closely monitored through covertly intercepted communications. On the 3rd of June, tactical units executed a flawless deception, luring him to an East Q address. Heavily armed and violently cornered, Nikolai attempted a standoff, but highly trained operatives swiftly neutralized the imminent threat. The subsequent transport to the precinct was intensely volatile, showcasing the raw, unfiltered rage of a trapped predator. Once secured in the interrogation room, the atmosphere shifted to a high-stakes psychological chess match. Detective Archbold finally sat across from his elusive target. Rather than focusing solely on the recent extortion, the investigator dropped a devastating bombshell. Archbold stated firmly that they knew exactly what happened to the vanished neighbor, Ivan Solikov. In that chilling moment, the blood drained completely from Nikolai's face. The ghost realized his deepest secret was finally exposed. The high-stakes confrontation within the interrogation room should have been the definitive conclusion to a terrifying criminal reign. Yet, the justice system was about to experience a catastrophic failure. Despite Detective Archbold's masterful strategy, building a genuinely watertight case required cooperative testimony. The entire legal foundation rested firmly on the deeply traumatized extortion victim. Paralyzed by the unfathomable prospect of facing his tormentor in an open courtroom, the businessman made a desperate choice. He orchestrated a massive financial fraud, vanishing overseas to his native country. Without their primary witness, the prosecution's ambitious case disintegrated. Within mere weeks, the most feared predator in the city walked out of the precinct, his severe charges entirely dismissed. This profound failure of the legal apparatus did not humble the Phantom. It radicalized him. Returning to the streets, his sense of absolute immunity surged. However, a deep, simmering rage remained. In his twisted psyche, the detective's piercing interrogation regarding his stolen identity was an unforgivable blow to his pride. The relentless hunter had dared to expose the invisible ghost, and such an affront demanded a severe, meticulously calculated retribution. In a chilling reversal of the natural law enforcement order, the criminal initiated a relentless campaign of psychological warfare against the very investigator sworn to stop him. He was determined to make Archbold his ultimate victim. Leveraging his vast underworld wealth, Nikolai bypassed traditional boundaries. He purchased the detective's private home address from a compromised, corrupt source within the police force itself. As targeted threats rapidly escalated into imminent danger, Archbold's daily reality fundamentally shattered. The highly seasoned investigator was suddenly forced into abrupt hiding, adopting the erratic, transient lifestyle of a frightened fugitive. Continually rotating between undisclosed hotels and remaining perpetually armed for his basic survival, the accomplished detective effectively became a captive prisoner within his own existence. To completely shatter his adversary's resolve, Nikolai aggressively expanded his perimeter of terror. He brazenly walked into a suburban hospitality establishment, operated by the detective's family, coldly confronting Archbold's father. Covert communications later suggested an unthinkable reality. The ruthless enforcer had arrived at the quiet family business armed with explosive ordnance. The staggering magnitude of this targeted intimidation forced the innocent parents to immediately liquidate their livelihood and flee the city entirely. The Phantom had successfully weaponized fear, turning the justice system into an astonishing display of his unchecked power. As the new millennium dawned, the Phantom's untouchable status bred a catastrophic arrogance. His relentless appetite for total dominance led him to target a rapidly ascending figure within the city's illicit chemical trade. This emerging syndicate leader had meticulously built a highly lucrative network, controlling essential supply chains and employing specialized chemists to manufacture high-value contraband. Recognizing a profoundly profitable enterprise, Nikolai forcefully inserted himself into the complex operation. While the rising kingpin deeply feared the enforcer's notorious reputation, the sheer volume of goods Nikolai controlled made a tense partnership an absolute necessity. However, this fragile alliance, forged entirely in mutual greed and quiet terror, was inevitably destined for a swift fracture. Never satisfied with mere participation, the Phantom orchestrated a hostile, systemic takeover. He began aggressively criticizing the quality of the syndicate's product, a calculated grievance specifically designed to force a direct meeting with the lead chemist. His genuine objective was far more severe: to execute a brazen abduction and compel the manufacturer to work exclusively under his absolute control. Yet, this aggressive maneuver proved to be his ultimate fatal miscalculation. He severely underestimated the quiet, calculated resolve of his cornered adversaries. On a crisp autumn afternoon in mid-April of 2003, the reign of terror reached a sudden, definitive conclusion on a bustling suburban street. Lured to a supposed dispute resolution, Nikolai stepped out of his luxury vehicle, entirely unaware that an elaborate trap had already closed around him. As he momentarily turned away to retrieve a personal item, he was swiftly ambushed. Associates of the rival syndicate, including one harboring a deep personal vendetta from a prior grievance, carried out a precise and fatal act. The Phantom lost his life in a highly coordinated sequence of events, permanently ending his grip on the city. The immediate aftermath of this profound event sent seismic shockwaves throughout the deeply fractured metropolitan landscape. For the underground community, the removal of such a volatile predator brought a heavy, unspoken relief. More profoundly, his permanent absence instantly liberated his captive spouse from her harrowing domestic nightmare, and allowed the besieged detective to finally emerge safely from forced exile. Ultimately, the definitive end of the city's most feared enforcer served as a monumental catalyst for systemic change. This historic turning point directly birthed a highly specialized task force, an unprecedented initiative that systematically dismantled the overarching syndicate structure and forever reshaped the pursuit of justice.